We like to think of history as a static, unchanging series of events. The events of the past simply are what they are, and that's the way it will always be. While this is technically true, as there's no way to change the past, barring the invention of reverse time travel, it doesn't mean that our understanding of history isn't constantly changing and evolving. As we make new archaeological discoveries or gain the ability to decode ancient texts that had remained unreadable to modern people for decades or longer, we are constantly learning that not everything we believed we knew about history is correct. A statement could spend centuries as an indisputable truth, only to later be completely disproven. Similarly, things that were seen as nothing more than myths and fables of ancient people could be discovered to be entirely, or at least partially, true. Not Atlantis, because that was definitely just a fictional story meant to illustrate a point, but other supposed myths have since been confirmed as having a basis in reality. And today we'll be looking at 4 times that new discoveries resulted in history as we know it being rewritten. The word caveman has been synonymous with Neanderthals for as long as we've known Neanderthals were a thing. And for most of that time, there was one basic assumption that went largely unquestioned. Neanderthals were stupid and they were brutish. Despite being humans, they were always depicted as being much more simian in nature. They had slouched posture and flat and more elongated skulls than Homo sapiens. It only made sense, based on their physical appearance, that they must have been less intelligent than modern humans. After all, isn't that how science works? Well, for over 100 years it was. Since the discovery of their species, Neanderthals have constantly been portrayed as inferior to modern humans. After all, we survived and they went extinct, so obviously we must have been better than they were. Right? As it turns out, the answer is no, and new research from the past few decades is calling into question whether or not Neanderthals really were our intellectual inferiors. Have you ever wondered how to keep your skin feeling as fresh and radiant as you are? Well, listen up, because today's sponsor, Foreo Sweden, has the answer, and that is the UFO 3, which is the ultimate deep cleaning facial hydration device. Now look, I'm not exactly a skincare guru, it's not why you're here, we're not a beauty channel, but even I know that hydrated skin is happy skin, and that's where the UFO 3 comes in. It's not just a device, it's basically like a little spa day for your face, which is nice. UFO 3 increases skin moisture by a whopping 126% in just 2 minutes. That's quicker than brewing your morning coffee, and guess what? It's more effective than a sheet mask alone. In fact, it's clinically proven to reduce the appearance of wrinkles in just 1 week. So what's the secret? Well, it combines warming thermotherapy, cooling cryotherapy, and full spectrum LED therapy to give you the ultimate skincare experience. The warming thermotherapy softens your skin, helping those active mask ingredients penetrate deeper for optimal hydration, especially during the winter months. And here's the kicker. UFO 3 is an easy mode for when you're on the go. Just press a button and voila. Customized treatments at your fingertips. It's like magic for your skincare routine. Plus, customize it with the Foreo app. The app guides you through treatments, making your skincare routine a breeze. They've got a special offer for you. Click the link below to get 30% discount on the UFO 3, and if you use the code PROJECTS10, you'll get an additional 10% discount. Don't wait, because this offer is only for the first 50 people. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. And now back to today's video. Early fossil records were incomplete, and skeletons were assembled incorrectly. Over time, it was discovered that Neanderthals didn't walk with bent knees and poor posture. They walked as upright as modern humans do. And while their brains were shaped differently, they actually had larger brains than Homo sapiens. Unlikely fossil discoveries of tiny bones from the neck even indicated that they were likely just as capable of a full range of human speech as we are. It's believed that the physical differences between Neanderthals and modern humans likely stemmed from the environments in which we originated, rather than being indicative of their level of advancement. Modern humans originated in Africa, while Neanderthals are believed to have originated somewhere in Eurasia, as they occupied the entire landmass. Their thicker bones and stockier frame were potentially just to make their bodies more suited for the colder environment. There's also an increasing amount of archaeological evidence that they were sophisticated at building tools, or at least they were as sophisticated as humans could be during the Stone Age. Neanderthals were once believed to be primitive scavengers who only used the most basic tools possible, but archaeological sites showed the presence of stone tools attached to handles using pitch, which is essentially tar. Manufacturing pitch requires high heat, making these tools fairly advanced for humans living hundreds of thousands of years ago. Other sites contained baubles and ornaments, as well as ochre, a pigment used for both cave painting and body art. Contrary to what had been previously believed, this suggests that Neanderthals engaged in rituals of a cultural or religious nature and had symbolic forms of communication. If that wasn't all enough, we've got the DNA evidence to support that Neanderthals couldn't have been as inferior as once thought. Because you may well be part Neanderthal. They inhabited Eurasia at least as far back as 430,000 years ago, with Homo sapiens emerging in Africa around 300,000 years ago. Then, around 100,000 years ago, the modern humans walked out of Africa into Europe and the Middle East, where they encountered Neanderthals for the first time, and it was lust at first sight. All the evidence shows that Neanderthals were at least as intelligent and developed as Homo sapiens, and the two species did a good amount of interbreeding. As for why the Neanderthals went extinct instead of Homo sapiens, that part still remains an open question, with a number of different theories. The long-held beliefs about the primitive nature of Neanderthals were the result of numerous biases, and they provide a valuable lesson for future anthropological research. When people think of the earliest modern humans, they generally think of well-known ancient civilizations from the beginning of recorded history. Though this is a difficult pitfall to avoid, it makes for an unfair comparison, as it ignores tens of thousands of years of prehistory during which Homo sapiens' technology and culture was equally as primitive as the Neanderthals. There are multiple references to the city of Troy and the Trojan War in ancient texts, but the most famous were predominantly found in fiction. While the historian Herodotus did write about Troy, he is well known for including mythical elements in his history texts. But of all the works written about Troy, none are more famous than Homer's Odyssey and Iliad. Of course, Homer's works are also the most famous accounts of the Cyclops, Medusa, and the Sirens, so how accurate could these obvious works of fiction have actually been? Surprisingly, there was never actually any doubt in the minds of historians that Troy really had been a populous and important city. However, for many centuries, it was assumed that wherever the city had been, it was lost forever. Because of it being lost, and despite historians' belief that it really had existed, the city of Troy became the stuff of legend and mythology. This was a popular belief among lay people until one man set out with nothing but a hope, a dream, the vast fortune he had accumulated, and entirely too much dynamite. The life of Heinrich Schliemann is an interesting one, to say the least. He was born into poverty in Neubuckow in Germany in the early 19th century, and his mother died when he was a child. His father sent him to stay with his uncle, a pastor, and he attended grammar school and vocational school, but was too poor to go to university. Instead, at the age of 14, he became an apprentice grocer, working for 5 years before he injured himself from too much heavy lifting. Following that, Schliemann became a cabin boy on a boat bound for Venezuela. Just 12 days into the voyage, the boat was destroyed at sea. Schliemann and the other survivors washed up in the Netherlands, so he just stayed in Amsterdam for a few years, working his way up from being a messenger boy to becoming a representative for an import-export firm. In 1850, Schliemann learned that his brother Ludwig had died, but not before becoming extremely wealthy in the California gold rush. He left for California and used the inheritance from his brother to start a bank in Sacramento, buying and selling gold dust. However, when complaints started coming in that the gold dust he sold them came in underweight, he went back to Germany, sold the business, and moved to Russia. Schliemann then used the money he had made to live the high life, making wealthy friends, and then marrying the wealthy niece of one of those wealthy friends. From there, it was on to some light profiteering, cornering the market in saltpeter, sulfur, and lead, and then selling them to the Russian government, who needed those items to make ammunition for the Crimean War. Once that was all sold, Schliemann had made enough money to retire at the age of 36. So, what was he going to do with the rest of his life? Ever since he was a child, Schliemann was determined to find Troy, and that's exactly what he did. He traveled to Turkey to attempt an excavation at Pınarbaşı, which was largely believed to be the modern-day location of the ancient city. However, at the behest of a local expert, Frank Calvert, Schliemann instead excavated in Hisarlik. It didn't take long for Schliemann to find exactly what he was looking for, especially because he decided to just dynamite his way through the ground to make the whole process faster. He blew past layer after layer of forgotten cities until discovering what he believed to be the Homeric Troy. Troy was no longer a legend or a lost city. It was a real place in Turkey. Unfortunately, the crude methods for excavation used by Schliemann have caused history on the matter to be rewritten multiple times. Though he is credited for discovering the site of the ancient lost city, he also dynamited his way down to Troy II, the second oldest incarnation of the city. While his initial claims of finding the Homeric Troy were once accepted, it's since been determined that the city described by Homer is either Troy 6 or 7. It's hard to say for sure, as the dynamite caused a lot of damage and moved artifacts between layers. But at least Troy will never be thought of as a lost city again, just an important historical city that some idiot dynamited the hell out of. For thousands of years, people were absolutely certain that they knew who built the pyramids of Giza. After all, there were only two logical answers. To many people, that answer was aliens, but to more sensible people, that answer was slaves. For over 2 millennia, it was the largely undisputed belief that the only way the pyramids could have possibly been constructed was through the use of extensive slave labor. This was even supported by Herodotus, who totally knew a guy. Herodotus wrote that when he visited Egypt, someone told him that it took 20 years for 400,000 men working in 3-month shifts of 100,000 men each to complete the pyramids. Such a workforce is almost unimaginable, and it seems impossible that so many people could have been used for construction unless they were slaves who were viewed as entirely expendable. The fact that this number was simply told to Herodotus by a tour guide 2,000 years after the fact didn't seem to raise a lot of questions regarding its veracity. Even if it was an exaggeration of the size of the workforce, it just seemed like the most plausible scenario. However, a pair of discoveries in 1989 and 1990 painted the construction of the pyramids in a much different light. It was then that American archaeologist Mark Lenner discovered the workers' village and the tombs of the pyramid builders, both located just outside the stone wall surrounding the pyramid complex. Though the village featured communal sleeping quarters for the workers, the conditions far exceeded what we expect would have been provided for slaves. Beyond just a bed to sleep in, there were also bakeries, breweries, restaurants, copper workshop, and a hospital. It couldn't have possibly housed 100,000 people at a time. Based on the size of the village and the cemetery, it is believed that it actually housed 10,000 workers, though other evidence confirmed that builders were in fact working in 3-month shifts, as Herodotus had written. It also showed that the project took around 30 years rather than 20. The discovery of the cemetery was perhaps an even more clear sign that these workers were likely paid and at least somewhat respected employees rather than just slaves. Not only did those that died during the construction process have the honor of being buried near the pharaoh's pyramid, but each was also buried with jars of beer and bread to aid them in their journey to the afterlife. More evidence has been found to support the idea that the workers building the pyramids were free men, but none was more exciting than the 2013 discovery of the Diary of Mira. The diary was discovered by Zahi Hawass, an Egyptian archaeologist and former Minister of State for Antiquities Affairs. It was found in a man-made cave on the coast of the Red Sea, and while it's been named a diary, the 4,500-year-old papyrus is actually a work log. This log was kept by Mura, whose official title was Inspector, and it details his work overseeing the transportation of limestone from 2 different quarries to the construction site. Other Egyptian writings and inscriptions made mention of the workers and various administrative aspects of the projects as well, indicating that it was a highly sophisticated and well-managed operation. Of course, the sophistication of building the pyramids had never really been called into question, and in fact there remain a number of open questions regarding how exactly they were able to accomplish it. But after over 2,000 years, there is now sufficient evidence that they did not just use expendable slaves to brute force the problem. Though many of the workers may have been poor, the newer evidence suggests that they were paid employees who took pride in their work. And should they wind up perishing on the job, they would be rewarded with a much nicer burial than the average poor person in ancient Egypt would have received.
Money instead of sheets.
Every schoolchild in the United States was taught the rhyme, "In 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue." That much is certainly true, but it was the lead up to a larger narrative about how Christopher Columbus was the first European to discover North America. This story, as it is taught to children, already featured a lot of revisionist history. American kids were taught that Columbus was a brave and heroic explorer who sought to prove that the world was round, which he did by discovering North America. Of course, in reality, Greek mathematicians already proved the Earth was round 2,000 years earlier. Columbus never set foot on mainland North America, only the Caribbean islands, and he was dragged back to Spain to be put on trial for all the horrible things that he did as governor of the Indies. But despite those inaccuracies, this remained the way the story was told for hundreds of years. However, in the 1800s, something started to change. A pair of Icelandic sagas, the saga of Eric the Red and the saga of the Greenlanders, had been part of Norse oral tradition for centuries before finally being written down in the 12th or 13th century. These sagas told the story of Eric the Red's discovery of Greenland and his son Leif Erikson's discovery of North America. While other Europeans were at least vaguely aware of the existence of these sagas, they were largely ignored. It wasn't until 1841, in the first publication of an English-language translation, that the story really started to gain traction with a new audience. Based on the information from the 2 sagas, as well as other historical accounts, in 1874, Rasmus Anderson, the son of Norwegian immigrants, published his book, America Not Discovered by Columbus. Many found the arguments in the book convincing, while others thought it was all libelous nonsense with no proof. But in 1898, a piece of proof would allegedly be found. Swedish immigrant Olof Orman found a large stone slab in central Minnesota covered in what appeared to be Norse runes. While at first it seemed like the Kensington runestone was a major discovery that would provide proof of Vikings having reached North America before Columbus, it was quickly debunked as a hoax. With the only physical evidence of a Viking presence on the continent proven to be an unconvincing forgery, the official story of Columbus being the first European to find North America was again unchallenged for decades. Then in 1960, a new discovery was made. Explorer Helge Ingstad and his wife Anne, an archaeologist, discovered the remains of a Viking settlement in Newfoundland. Contained within the wreckage were numerous artifacts, all dating back to approximately 1000 AD. Since then, many more artifacts have been found as proof of the Vikings' visits to the area of Canada they referred to as Vinland. Of course, it's not terribly surprising that it took so long to find physical evidence of Vinland. While Columbus, quickly followed by other Europeans, sought to colonize the Americas and set up permanent settlements, the Viking presence on the continent was short-lived. Though some evidence suggests they may have continued to sail to North America to gather resources and trade with the locals for at least a century, the Viking occupation of the continent only lasted about a decade before hostilities between them and the indigenous people, who they referred to as Skraelings or wretched people, drove them out of their settlements. But while the official story has been rewritten, actually changing the popular narrative is going to take a bit more time, especially since many American schools can't afford history books that were written after 1960.